Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you from wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Charlotte Hebebrand from IFPRI's Communications and Public Affairs team, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this seminar on reforming agricultural policies and farm support to advance sustainable food system transformation, part of the CGIAR series on strengthening food systems resilience with kind support from the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. For food systems to become more inclusive, resilient, sustainable, and healthy, they must be transformed. Policies and financing will be required for successful transformation, and that is the topic of today's seminar. We're excited to hear from you. We will have two separate Q&A sessions in the program, so please do submit your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on Twitter. To help tee us up today, it's my great pleasure to turn over to Jo Swinnen. He is the Director General of IFPRI, as well as the Managing Director for the Systems Transformation Science Group in the CGIAR. And Jo will talk to us about the importance of the repurposing agenda and how it figures in the work of the CGIAR. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. It's a great pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's the next seminar in the series of CGIAR BMZ joint seminar series, and I would like to start by thanking BMZ for the support that they have given us, for basically coming to us, for organizing this seminar, and it's been a great success so far. And I expect today's to be very successful and very yield great interest and attendance as well. You will hear from Jan Brix, who is a Senior Policy Officer at BMZ, next on this, in giving their perspective on the seminar series and the issues more broadly. Today, we have a very important topic, and we have a fantastic lineup of speakers discussing this topic. Repurposing is at the heart of food systems transformation. We all know that food systems transformation is really crucial to address, to make the world's some of the greatest challenges that the world is facing, to address these. We think about nutrition, food security, climate change, biodiversity, poverty reduction, etc. We also know that we need investments and we need changed incentives to make this happen. So that brings the finance, or that makes the finance question very central to food systems transformation. In the preparation of the Food Systems Summit in 2021, IFPRI co-led the finance lever together with colleagues from the World Bank and FOLU, and we identified several components of a new food finance architecture for agriculture and food system transformation. Now, this food finance architecture for the future has several components. Some of them are public, some of them are private, some of them are new, and some of them are about existing sources, public and private, and redirecting them, repurposing them going forward. And so I think particularly today we'll talk about the repurposing of public support. And it is a very intriguing and it's a great opportunity, I think, also to think about it and to change it, because the funding is there, it is already spent, it is large. We talk about $800 billion across the world per year. So that's large in general, but it's also large in comparison to the investments that are needed. And it is not helping the transformation right now. And in fact, many people would argue that it's doing exactly the opposite. So all this makes it a very intriguing issue, a very great opportunity as well, if we can change that as an engine of change, as an engine of transformation. Now, often it's been said that this is an issue of rich countries and emerging countries, because the US, the EU, China really have a large share of this $800 billion spending. However, if you look into the public spending in developing countries, also the policy structure that is there, we see that while the dollars may be lower, if you look at the share of public support to agriculture spent on the type of policies which are not helping food system transformation, it is large there as well. So this is really an issue which is relevant both for rich countries and poor countries. And today we'll have perspective from both sides of the world, if you want, or if you look at all sides, because there's an emerging country perspective as well. The an important question, there's several important questions that need to be addressed. So one is, what's the best way of reform through changing incentives, through reallocating investments, right? IFPRI has done a lot of work on this together with colleagues from the World Bank, from FAO, from OECD. And so we will hear from them today, giving their perspective, their findings and their recommendations. And actually, Will Martin is representing the IFPRI team here. We also will hear perspective from our colleagues at the World Bank, Sergiy Zorya is with us, and Debbie Palmer from FCDO, who has supported a lot of this work. We're also very pleased to have Loraine on the program today. Loraine is doing fantastic work as a senior advisor at CGIAR. She is on secondment from the World Bank, and as such is actually building bridges between science and innovation investments and finance. And I think this has huge potential going forward. Another question is, of course, what we need to do to make this happen. What are the country experiences and perspectives? And for this, I really look forward to hear from our colleagues from Brazil, Brazil is chairing the G20, will be hosting the COP next year. So it will be great to hear their perspective and how this fits in the policy agenda there. We'll hear from Ghana, from Patrick Ofori, and then Shenggen is with us, Shenggen Fan, who will talk about China, which has gone through a series of policy reforms, also going a bit back and forward, I would say. And so really great to hear his perspective on this. And finally, Alan Matthews is with us. Alan he has been following EU policy for decades and is very well placed to see. I mean, the question is will the EU's Green Deal survive the farmer protest in Europe at this point? And I really look forward to hear all their perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. Jan, can I turn over to you? We know that BMZ is very interested in the repurposing agenda, and we look forward to you also helping us to open the discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Johan. Dear colleagues, dear listeners, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this today's policy seminar, also from our side. First of all, I want to thank IFPRI for hosting our joint CGIAR BMZ policy seminar series. And for over 50 years, CGIAR has been a leader in delivering critical science and innovation to transform agriculture and food systems. As Germany, we are a committed partner and supporter of the CGIAR and the One CGIAR reform. And we're proud to celebrate our 50th anniversary for funding the CGIAR this year, actually. The reform process has, for the first time, positioned CGIAR visibly at the forefront of shaping global agendas. To me and to us, this seminar series is a great example of leveraging CGIAR expertise for transforming agriculture and food systems. We are convinced that research plays a very critical role in driving transformative changes in agriculture and food systems. And we are aware of the enormous challenges that lie ahead of us. Therefore, BMZ has significantly increased its annual funding to CGIAR in recent years and nearly doubling our support. But when it comes to paving the way for more sustainable, healthy, resilient, and fair agricultural and food systems, coherent and smart agricultural policies are essential. I think that's obvious to all of us. Today's public support to agriculture amounts to over $850 billion per year. Far too much of this support, however, sets wrong incentives, is unevenly distributed, and harmful to the environment and human health, as we all know. To address this and repurpose harmful agricultural subsidies, BMZ has invested 85 million euros into the multi-donor trust fund Food Systems 2030 of the World Bank for the repurposing agenda alone. Through this, BMZ is supporting 5 governments in repurposing the agricultural supports towards programs that promote more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient agriculture and food systems. In addition, BMZ is funding the global program Sustainable Agriculture Systems and Policies, that is the name, to facilitate the scaling up of a sustainable agriculture policy reform in 9 partner countries. And last but not least, we're proud to have welcomed many high-level partners at the site of the Global Agriculture and Food Security Forum this January, together with the World Bank, FCDO, and our German Ministry for Agriculture, to one of the so-called policy dialogues to drive this agenda further. So finally, to be short, let me say that I'm very much looking forward to today's webinar and to hearing your scientific, global, and regional perspectives on agricultural policies and strategies for repurposing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you also for the great support to CGIAR over now 50 years. That's impressive. We're now turning to a discussion around the science, and Loraine Ronchi is with us. She is a CGIAR Senior Advisor for Policy Impact, and she was also part of the writing team of a great a report, Achieving Agricultural Breakthrough, which was part of the overall breakthrough report, which was released in advance of COP28. And she's going to provide some teasers of the kind of technological innovations that can help us with food systems transformation, and that repurposed finance could help perhaps promote. Over to you, Loraine.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to Jan and Jo for framing this discussion about the reform of agricultural policy, the reform of agricultural support, and the repurposing of that support. But repurposing to what? Repurposing is not an end in itself, of course, and I'm going to talk a little bit about repurposing towards a just transition through climate science and innovation. Next. Why would I say that? If we have a think about what proportion of the world's population rely on the food sector for their livelihood, it's a lot. It's more than half. And a majority of those people are in the global south. The agri-food sector is particularly vulnerable to climate change, which means that producers in the global south are especially at risk. So the idea is that technological approaches, science, innovation, and policy breakthroughs lead to just transitions in the agri-food sector. Next slide, please. So this word breakthrough, this term breakthrough, and then Charlotte has already sort of alluded to it, comes from the breakthrough agenda that was launched at the Glasgow COP. And it covers, with the agenda comes a report. And the question being, what international collaboration actions can bring a breakthrough in key sectors. So it actually covers several sectors, and one of those is agriculture. And last year, a decision was made to focus on the scaling of science and innovation. And so the chapter came to the CGIAR. Next, please. The team was given, the team who's led by Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, who is the director for the Climate Impact Platform at the CGIAR, and this large team of scientists. Next, please. We were given 7 technologies. 7 technology areas were specified. You see them up on the screen in front of you. Reduced emissions from fertilizers, alternative proteins, reduced food loss and waste, crop and livestock breeding, reduced methane emissions from livestock, agroecological approaches, and digital services. So we did 2 things. First thing was to have a deep dive report, which you see the image of on your screen right now. And this was 7 different teams of scientists delving into those 7 areas and doing 3 things. One is to just state the state of science. Here are a bunch of technologies. Here is the scientific evidence behind them. Then they stated what the obstacles to scaling those are, and then they stated some recommendations with regards to that. The second thing we did was write the actual chapter, which was to look across the 7 technologies and say, hey, what is common here? How could we maybe frame some broad recommendations that could cut across the breakthrough agenda of each of these technologies? Next slide, please. And there were 5 of these recommendations. One was about climate finance, and we all know that we need much more climate finance, and hence this conversation about repurposing. But it was quite specific about making sure that there was going to be an increase in finance towards scaling approaches and technologies for which science has generated evidence for their impact. The second one of particular importance today is on policies, regulations, and innovations. Not just to commit to a process, which Jan has already alluded to, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about, of sort of sharing the experience of repurposing and the redirecting of subsidies, but also to have that agenda really look specifically at the facilitation of faster uptake of proven technologies. The third recommendation is around metrics and indicators and standards. And I'm jumping to the fifth, which was around private sector markets and trade. And I want to come back now to this one. Next, RD&D. All right, so research and development of technologies has by now proven to have robustly high returns. So when one is thinking of what the best alternative investment may be to meet one's development objectives through the repurposing of current agricultural support, you can feel pretty confident that by this point, there's been nearly 300 studies showing that the return to agricultural research spending is high in every region and on average. In fact, the median rate of return on investment in agricultural research is on the order of 43% for developing countries. That's very high. Apart from this sort of like broad overview of where we could really make a difference in terms of breaking through, helping science to break through on the climate agenda and on a just transition, the report also went into sort of granular technology. So Charlotte referred to sort of a teaser. So next slide, please. If we think about repurposing for livelihoods improvement in livestock with obvious mitigation co-benefits, there are a number of technologies that I could have picked from, but let's just focus for a minute on anaerobic digesters or biogas digesters, which break down organic material like manure and generate biogas, but also generate fertilizer called digestate. So why is this important? Well, 1.3 billion people depend on livestock for livelihoods and food security. Anaerobic digesters can replace fossil fuels, reducing energy costs for their households, reducing energy costs for their productive activity. They can replace a good part of costly fertilizers also derived from fossil fuels. So it's about sort of increasing the efficiency and the profitability of their activity through cost reduction. And one of my favorite fun facts, which I have been forbidden to raise at dinner parties, is that if all collectible manure were to be used in the world, anaerobic digestion technology could produce enough methane to get electricity for between 330 and 490 million people. Besides the idea that access to electricity is a basic right, one can think about the impact of electrification on productivity, on human health, on GDP, etc. And of course, with major mitigation benefits. We know that 12% of total emissions come from livestock, 60% of that is methane. And in the case of liquid manure, anaerobic digesters could capture 50 to 70% of that methane. So a key recommendation of the Breakthrough Report was to redirect public monies to reducing the cost of these technologies so they were accessible. Next slide. The other thing that the Breakthrough Report did, which I already mentioned, and this is almost at the end here, is that we drew out what it is that needed to happen at an international collaboration level to sort of break through in each of these technology areas and in general in the case of bringing science to bear on our development objectives. Next slide, please. Finally, I just have sort of one last thought, okay? While the title of the presentation was around climate science and innovation, and we've already discussed the robust returns on research innovations, and that makes those things very clear candidate answer to the question, repurposing to what? The Breakthrough Report also provided evidence on tried and true practices that have been around for a long time. There's a lot of science, there's a lot of evidence backing them, but they've not come to scale despite what their scaled impact could be. There's a number of reasons for this, but one is certainly that existing subsidy and support regimes drew us away from them instead of towards. But that is something that can change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loraine, and a great teaser there on the digesters to solve the methane issue. We're now going to turn to Will Martin, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI, who is presenting IFPRI's work on this topic and look at how policy reforms can reset incentives to adopt technological innovations, such as the ones outlined in the Breakthrough Report, but also look at how we can shift dietary choices to deliver some of the triple wins for people, the planet, and livelihoods. Over to you, Will.
Right. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Right. So a key element of our research program in recent times has been looking at the question of repurposing agricultural support. We're looking to get benefits for the planet in terms of sustainability, especially given the large footprint of agriculture that Loraine just mentioned, this large contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions. But we've got to be very careful about the impacts on people and the economic impact. So this is based on joint work with a team at IFPRI, at the World Bank, and now at FAO. Next slide, please. So the $800 billion question, what can we do better to support, with agricultural support, to promote sustainable system transformation? Now, this work is at the request of many parties, governments, the G20, the G7, the COP, the UN Food Systems Summit, the international organizations, the Bank, FAO, UNDP, UNEP, and important civil society organizations like FOLU, the Just Rural Transition. So what answers do we have? Well, for the moment, we focused on global, internationally concerted scenarios, how to repurpose to reduce emissions. We have to focus globally because this is a global problem. And we're very concerned about contributing to other development goals as well as improving sustainability. A key next step is country level work, because the impacts of reforms are going to differ enormously at country level, and the political economy of achieving reforms will differ as well. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at repurposing, it's very, very important to look at what the actual support is. As we've mentioned, 850 odd billion nowadays in terms of support. And most of that is for market distorting support to unsustainable practices. So if we look, the 317 billion in 2019-21, that's positive market price support. That's come about by raising consumer prices in order to generate higher prices for producers. It's not budget support that can readily be repurposed. It's a transfers. There's another set of important transfers. That's the negative support provided in a number of developing countries where consumer prices, producer and consumer prices, are held down through things like export restrictions. That's highly distorting as well. Our main focus, though, is on the budget support elements, the 74 billion that's been allocated to coupled support, distorting support, output subsidies, subsidies on inputs that are available, readily available, in what we call elastic supply. As well as that, there are large amounts of transfers which are less directly coupled to production, things like the EU single farm payment. In addition, we have 106 billion spent on general services. That's public goods such as research and development, rural infrastructure, extension. These are elements of support that would be vastly underprovided if governments weren't to provide them, and which, as Loraine mentioned, are underprovided given the large rates of return on them. There are also consumer support, like the US food stamps, 100 billion. The extent and rates of support are very uneven across countries. Next slide, please. So for this analysis, we used large-scale models with detailed assessments, able to make detailed assessments of poverty and food security. With the Dept model, we looked at, the first scenario we looked at was eliminating existing support, a very radical change. And what we find was that that leads to relatively small outcomes, declines in output. There's a rise in the cost of healthy diets. I'm talking about the blue bars here. There's a modest impact on emissions, relatively small. Second, we looked at conditionality scenarios. Things like the move towards organic agriculture, reductions in fertilizer use. Farmers would receive support conditional on engaging in those practices. The challenge with this is that it reduces food output. It can potentially yield large emission reductions, but those emission reductions are reduced by the fact that farmers have been pushed to lower yielding activities So more land is going to be required at a global level in order to meet food demand. So that's the concern there. The cost of healthy diets also rises because of the reduction in farm output. Shifting support to green innovations, raising productivity, lowers emissions, higher food output, lower poverty, healthy diets, drastic emission reductions. So the green bars there. And this highlights the point that Loraine made, how vitally important it is to look for innovations that improve environmental outcomes and also improve productivity. That also helps with adoption. Farmers want to adopt technologies typically that have higher productivity. Shifting support to healthy foods is also important and complementary, but as you can see, the small bars, they're the last set of bars, the small orange ones are actually quite modest. So next slide, please. So the implications, smart repurposing of subsidies can help achieve important societal goals: higher incomes, less poverty, lower emissions, better diets. Efficiency gains coming from research and development are critical to this. Repurposing is part of the puzzle, but it's not a panacea. We need to combine it with other interventions, possibly including demand interventions to reduce demand for products that are very emission intensive. There are important political economy obstacles. The gains are global, policies are national. This is a real challenge. We need to focus on that. And we need international coordination, but also careful identification of country-specific repurposing options. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Will, for an excellent presentation and highlighting that not all of that $800 billion can easily be repurposed, but a significant chunk of it, the budget resources could possibly be repurposed. We're now moving into our first panel, and here we look at, we know that international consensus and coordination around repurposing can play a critical role to encourage this kind of shifting of investment at the national level. So this is what the speakers in our first panel will be focusing on, and we will have a Q&A after our three distinguished speakers, so please do submit your questions, continue to do so. You can do so on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on Twitter. So I'm delighted to invite Bruno Brasil, a fitting name, given that he is with the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock of Brazil, where he serves as the Director of Sustainable Production and Irrigation. And Bruno, we all know that Brazil is hosting or is presiding over the G20 this year, and you will also be leading us into COP30 2 years from now. So we're delighted that you can join us and talk a little bit about what you see as the G20 priorities on this repurposing agenda. Over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I would like first to thank the co-organizers of the seminar, CGIAR, IFPRI, and BMZ for the opportunity to take part in this panel. In the following minutes, I'll share with you a little bit about the 4 priorities indicated by Brazil at the presidency of G20 for the Agriculture Working Group. So the first priority is sustainability of agri-food systems in their multiple pathways. According to FAO, it's estimated that over 700 million people suffer from hunger today. And also according to FAO, a sustainable food system is one that delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that economic, social, and environmental basis to generate food security and nutrition for future generations is not compromised. Building the international consensus is the first step, but the governments will play a crucial role in leading the complex process of transforming national food systems, combining regulatory measures with the direct interventions through public policies. In light of this, one of the priorities for the G20 is to enhance technical cooperation between countries, by sharing experiences of public policies and governmental actions leading to transformation of food systems towards sustainability, reducing inequalities, adapting to climate change, governing land and water, and promoting the production of healthy food. It is crucial, however, to bear in mind that there is no single solution to promote access to safe and nutritious food for all, nor a single agri-food system that applies to all countries. The second priority for the G20 Agricultural Working Group will be enhancing international trade contribution to food and nutritional security. International trade of agricultural products and food plays a strategic role in promoting food and nutritional security by expanding supply possibilities and balancing food distribution among countries, especially in the context of climate change. Therefore, it is important that international trade and national food systems mutually support each other to ensure food and nutritional security for populations according to the specific needs and challenges of each country. It is equally crucial to overcome obstacles to international trade in agricultural products and food, such as distortive trade measures and arbitrary, disguised, unjustified barriers. This includes mitigating distortive subsidies and adopting transparent and evidence-based sanitary and technical measures. By promoting a fair and balanced trade environment, the G20 can expand opportunities for food exports, generate jobs and income in the agricultural sector, and contribute to national and global food security. The third priority, recognizing the essential role of family farmers, peasants, indigenous peoples, and traditional communities for the sustainable, healthy, and inclusive food systems. Brazil's presidency of the G20 will be an opportunity to reiterate the urgency of policies that recognize the strategic role of family farming in the transition to sustainable, healthy, and inclusive food systems. Special attention will be granted to policies concerning women, youth, indigenous peoples, and traditional communities, with an emphasis on the importance of promoting horizontal and mutually beneficial forms of international cooperation as a strategy to achieve the SDGs. The fourth and final priority, to promote the sustainable integration of fisheries and aquaculture into local and global value chains. The global demand for fish will continue to grow. In order to meet this expansion, significant production increase will have to come from aquaculture, since world's fish stocks are roughly at the limits of maximum sustainable exploitation, or even overfished. The Brazilian G20 presidency will seek consensus under two fundamental pillars. The first one, sustainability, the reduction of market distortions and reduction of overexploitation of fish resources caused by subsidies that are harmful to fisheries. The second pillar, equity, for a fair distribution of catch quotas and opportunities for fisheries development, reducing asymmetries between developed and developing countries. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for that overview of Brazil's priorities for the G20 agenda in around agriculture and food systems. So turning now to the World Bank, it's my pleasure to introduce Sergiy Zorya, who's the lead agricultural economist and global lead for policies and public expenditures at the World Bank in the Agricultural and Food Global Practice. You will be speaking today, Sergiy, about Food Systems 2030. Over to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. So I'm waiting for the slides. So let's go to the second slide, please. Next. So there was a lot of in the previous speakers talked about the repurposing, but I'd like to remind us that it's this dialogue on improving the effectiveness and efficiency of policies and public expenditures is not new. I've just included the toolkit we prepared in 2011 in the great partnership with the UK defeat at that time. But what changed over time is the nature of the problem, the extent of the problem. 10 years ago, our work in the bank on the repurposing was focusing on making sure that our projects, investment projects, and the support we provide to countries is aligned with the government expenditures. So now we have the increased evidence of the direct and hidden cost of distortive farm support. Will Martin talked about it. And we look much beyond the World Bank projects. Agricultural repurposing become essential in each country to transform food systems. And that's how we look on the repurposing in the World Bank these days. Next. So we are having the great partnership under the Food System 2030 Trust Fund with the German BMZ and the United Kingdom FCDO. It's a great partners. I'd like to thank them on behalf of the World Bank. We do the global advocacy for repurposing. You can see the two reports. First on the repurposing agricultural policies and support produced jointly with IFPRI. And recently the World Bank produced the report Detox Development, which was inspired by our work in agriculture. And it looked on the repurposing on the fuel subsidies, agricultural subsidies, and fishery subsidies. So we do, as the third, we do the global agricultural policy dialogues. They started in 2021 with the objectives of the support peer-to-peer knowledge exchanges. We support a lot of upstream country diagnostics to translate global aspirations in the local location-specific solutions. Was mentioned, the previous speakers mentioned that aspect already. There is, I think, the great understanding in the global level about the repurposing, but the solutions are local and the context specific, and we are spending significant resources and time on translate that knowledge through the agricultural public expenditure review. And the last but not least, we are working with the 5 countries right now, Bangladesh, Ghana, Malawi, Mozambique, and Tanzania, to provide them resources for implementing innovative repurposing options. And I'm really thrilled to have with us today Patrick Ofori from Ghana to talk about these developments. Next. But I would like to also bring your attention that how that work under the Food System 2030 Trust Fund leverages the bigger World Bank Group repurposing agenda. On the left side, you can see the list of the country studies, policy and public expenditure reviews, which we completed, the 13 studies. There are 33 ongoing studies, and we have quite interesting pipeline of the insights on repurposing, including from the regional perspective. In the East Asia, we are starting the work on the low emission rise, and the Latin America and Caribbeans, we are looking on the fiscal cost of the agricultural reforms. So this work is influenced a lot what the World Bank does. And more broadly, I would like just to give you the three examples where the analytical work supported by the FS 2030 has already led to agricultural reforms on the ground. Next. The first example is the Uzbekistan, where the problem has been negative market price support or taxation of the agriculture. You can see on the left side, significant divergence between world market prices and the domestic prices for cotton and wheat. Historically, the analytical work completed in 2021 was able to inform a lot of reforms in the country, including the complete phasing out of agricultural price taxation. In 2022, the taxation in the extent of 1.6% of GDP was phased out, and we are now moving to the dialogue with the government with the better price enabling environment, move to the reform of the public expenditures. Next. The example in Tanzania, it's a bit different, where we have the underspending on the agriculture. You can see on the left side, it's very small amount of funds going to agriculture, and the impact is not, and the program design is not taking into account the need for the bigger climate smart agriculture support. So we produced the work jointly with FAO and the MoFA team very recently, which led to the launch of the agricultural project for results in the amount of the $300 million. And so with a lot of concrete actions, which you can see on this slide, which will help to improve the quality of the public expenditures and the impact on the ground. Next. The third example is Zambia, with the same storyline, that we produced this analytical work on the left side, which led for the agricultural program for results with the amount of the $300 million. Next. I would like to share with you the couple of lessons which we need to take forward. The first is the group of lessons on the left side, which was come up through the work on the detox development report. On the right side is the additional lessons. I just wanted to stop on one or two before I go to my last slide. The first is that there is often lag between knowledge generation and reform. We need to have patience, keep generating knowledge, keep working with the champions, but generate that knowledge, make them available for the champions when the time comes and the possibility comes to do these specific reforms. Because when the champions, when there is the entry point for reforms and we don't have knowledge, this is the waste of the opportunity. And the final is that we really can achieve much more if we link funding to the reforms. And I think what we are doing with the help of the FS 2030 is really helping us to move forward. Next,
please wrap up, Sergey. Thank you.
And so we are looking forward to the scale up our engagement. And here you can see 5 points of our attention, where we will continue policy dialogues and we can continue to work with the partners on the analytical work and also on the financing of the repurposing going forward. It's at the core of the World Bank reform, and we look forward to collaborate with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergey. We're now turning to Debbie Palmer. Delighted that you're with us, Debbie. Debbie serves as the Director for Energy, Climate, and Environment at the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office, FCDO. Also very interested in the repurposing agenda. Over to you, Debbie. We don't hear you. You may be on mute. Still cannot hear you.
I'm not muted.
Now we go. Now we hear you.
Okay, super.
Apologies, Debbie. You're in and out. Maybe while you fix your setup there, I can take a question from the audience perhaps first. Or let's hear you one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we got you. Go ahead.
Amazing. I'm so sorry about the audio, but thank you so much. It's lovely to be here today, and I'm really honoured to join the panel. It's such an important topic to talk about, and I just want to first of all say thank you to IFPRI and BMZ for hosting the seminar. We have a strong strategic partnership with both institutions. We were really delighted at COP28 to be able to announce a new UK CGIAR Centre on Science to develop and deploy innovative solutions to transform food systems. So it's great to be here. And as colleagues have already heard today, that the food system is being challenged as it's never been challenged before. We have a real task ahead of us. So the timing of today's discussion is really is sort of apposite. To achieve sustainable agriculture and food systems that deliver healthy diets and dynamic, inclusive economies, we know we're going to have to address both escalating climate risks and escalating nature risks. And the ongoing food insecurity crisis is making this challenge ever more urgent. The UK has made tackling the multifaceted nature of food insecurity a priority in our recent international development white paper that was launched at the Global Food Summit that was hosted in London in November last year. So it's front and center of our mind. It's something we're really committed to, because promoting a just transition to sustainable agriculture is a critical element of our approach. And we're going to have to address climate and nature risks in order to reach lasting food and nutrition security. So I feel as though so many things are coming together, and we also saw the way in which this was showcased at COP28. We've got a lot of work to do, and it's great to have all of these experts together this afternoon to really discuss the options. Just as the evidence has been growing of the extent of the challenges we face, so too does the evidence of opportunities and alternatives, and we've been tracking that and spotting that, and we've heard a little bit from colleagues from Loraine, from Johan, from Will, from Sergiy on some of the things that have been happening. And government policy action and shifting of incentives and expenditures to support resilient, sustainable agriculture is going to be part of this puzzle and part of the solution. The agenda, as I said, feels as though it's starting to take hold globally. The UK was really proud to endorse at COP28 the Emeritus Leaders Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action, including within it the commitment to revisit and reorient agriculture public policies and support, which of course is at the epicenter of what we're discussing today. So we welcome this sort of building up of momentum. It started at COP26 during the UK's presidency. It's been maintained under the UK World Bank convened agriculture policy dialogue, and it continues to build and build. And that agricultural policy dialogue, I think, does provide a platform for government to government peer learning and support. And that's aiming to build ambition, build partnerships, and mobilize action on the policy changes that are needed for sustainable agriculture and food systems. And so I'm really proud, and it's, as I said, it's been growing and growing, and it's engaged over 50 governments since 2021. And based on the experience shared through that agricultural policy dialogue, together working very closely with the World Bank, we have launched 3 volumes of country-authored case studies, sharing experiences from policy action across the globe. We've also published a set of policy briefing notes, and those are highlighting the evidence base and the country examples on shifting incentives for, be it fertilizer use, soil health, and indeed payment for ecosystem services. And what we can see is that this work is highlighting the evidence-based solutions that lead countries are taking. And that can include incentivizing low carbon rice production in Vietnam. It includes innovative approaches to methane reduction in New Zealand, working in partnership with farmers and industry. It includes also scaling up climate smart agriculture in Zambia. And even domestically here in the UK, in England, we are redirecting our funding for farming from the previous system of area-based subsidies that don't promote sustainable agricultural approaches and productivity, to a new system that pays farmers for actions that benefit the environment. So we're in the UK, we are learning from our new approach, and we are sort of building our own evidence base. But internationally, the UK is also supporting developing countries to take policy action and to leverage investments into sustainable agriculture, working in partnership with the World Bank. So Sergiy's, talked to us about the World Bank Food Systems 2030 Trust Fund. But again, at COP28, the UK announced that partnership with the bank of up to £45 million over the next 5 years to support a just rural transition to sustainable agriculture and ensure implementation on the ground. So there's lots happening. Of course, as many of today's speakers have said, shifting policies and incentives is both complex and contested. And I really support Sergey's last point about needing to do the technical preparation and then grab the political opportunity. We know that farmers have got to be at the centre of our work as we do this. And since 2019, the UK has been supporting a range of work on a just rural transition to bring together food producers, governments, businesses, investors, civil society, indigenous people, etc., to try and champion those equitable solutions to food systems challenges. Innovation is also key, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I know I'm running out of time, but innovation is going to be key. Governments have a key role to play in terms of setting incentives and investments. And of course, Loraine spoke at the beginning on the agricultural breakthroughs and the need for deployment and development of clean and sustainable technologies. So there's an awful lot happening in this space through the policy dialogue, through the breakthroughs, and we recognise there's much more to do, including on harnessing the power of the private sector, and we're going to need to step up the pace. But finally, just to say, the UK really looks forward to working with and learning from all the partners engaged in this seminar today to support tangible action on the ground and at the global level. And it's great that we're coming together and sharing best practice and learning. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jebby, and thanks to FCDO for all of the support you're also providing to this very important agenda. So we have a number of questions here for our first Q&A, and I'm going to actually kick off with a question for Yo. This was an anonymous question that came in, and it's very fitting because you spoke in your opening remarks about the farmer protests that are happening in Europe. We know farmer protests are also happening in other places in the world. The question is, why are farmers on the front line of pollution mitigation, while billionaire private jet owners, villa owners, and industrialists are not under such pressure? And then maybe, Sergiy, I will come to you next. So just to give you a heads up, also a very interesting question from another anonymous questioner. The question is that some countries have removed their distorting subsidies. For example, Niger privatized the fertilizer market and use of fertilizers increased dramatically. So can they now come to the World Bank and ask for support after they have liberalized? But let's start with you, Yo.
Yes, thank you. I think Alan Matthews may pick up on some of that later as well. I think first the issue, I mean, agriculture and food and the food sector, food system as a whole, they are a major contributor to environmental problems. And these problems have been, I think, somehow insufficiently recognized in the past. And so we are seeing now kind of with the global agenda on environmental issues, climate change climate change policies and restrictions being implemented, that this is now disproportionately affecting agriculture in a way because in the past the necessary measures have not been taken. And this is, I think, affecting agriculture as well, particularly because it's a sector which is in structural decline. As an economy develops, we see that farm numbers have been going down for a century, really, in Europe. And so this adds to structural changes that are taking place. And so there is more than just the one thing of it. Basically adds, in addition to the volatility caused by fertilizer prices and etc. I think it's a combination of factors which is threatening farmers in their way of life. So it becomes much more than just an economic issue, but also an environmental issue, but really affecting. It's like it's a state of life. It is basically their livelihoods are under threat, and that I think causes a lot of very strong reactions right now. And I think the issue, the Green Deal, which is on the table now, the move towards more environmental restrictions, is something that this is the way to go in the future. And the problem has been that the necessary measures have not been implemented in the past, and therefore that the actions now are stronger than they would have been if necessary measures had been implemented much earlier. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Yo. And I think Alan is going to get to some of these points as well in his presentations in a little bit. So Sergiy, over to you on the, are you willing to provide support to countries that get rid of distorting subsidies?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a great question. I think in the sub-Saharan African context, it's one of these continents where we have the underuse of the fertilizers with the significant negative implication on the productivity. And it's great that in Niger, the first step in that direction was taken to open up the market and allow more higher adoption of the fertilizers. Now, to move to the next level, extremely important to look on the complementary programs to really help farmers to get the best outcomes and use the fertilizer sustainably. Complementary programs include the soil testing, soil fertility management, extension services to convert that fertilizer, which is always cost farmers, but needs to be converted into the benefits. So actually this strengthening the ability of the government to help private sector and the leverage private sector activities to help farmers to achieve productivity objectives with the much lower environmental footprint that we had before, as yours has also mentioning, is one of the core engagement on the repurposing in the Africa region. So country like Niger and other countries are really welcome to reach out our teams in the country office. We have the country office with the country programs. That's where the discussion and the dialogue should take place. And we will be happy at the global level to support that dialogue. Over.
Great, thank you. Patrick, I know you haven't spoken yet, but I wonder if I could direct an excellent question that's come in to you. We've talked a lot about technological innovations so far. The question from Angusom is, what are the agricultural technologies that can ease the life of farmers that are not so expensive, especially in developing countries that cannot afford to buy some of these very sophisticated technologies? And then the next set of questions I'd like to direct to you, Debbie. Patrick Chatney is asking whether the FCDO could comment on how UK agricultural policy intends to promote sustainability and resilience for British domestic farmers. And related to that question is a question about, in your view, what will ensure stickiness of farmers adopting and maintaining climate-smart agricultural practices once incentive payments expire? So very, very good questions. Patrick, can I ask you to come on the screen to respond to that first question?
Yeah, thank you. I would wish you would repeat the question. I didn't hear it clearly, please.
Yeah, so the question is, we've heard about some of the innovations that Loraine presented, and some of these may be quite costly to adopt. So in your view, what are the kinds of technologies that should be prioritized if we want to move towards more sustainable and inclusive and productive food systems in developing countries?
Okay, thank you. So rightly so that when we introduce technologies that are expensive or costly to adopt, we leave the smallholder farmers out, and then we don't eventually achieve our set of objectives. So what I would propose here is, when you look at providing technologies that the smallholder farmers can benefit from. One of such, what we are looking at here in Ghana, is to provide smallholder farmers with smaller implements, smallholder implements, where you don't have to spend a lot of resources to acquire them. For instance, if you talk about the riggers, you talk about the smallholder, small harvesters for rice production, for instance, you talk about I mean, the mechanized, smaller mechanized equipment for use for smallholder farmers. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, then it will be more inclusive by allowing smallholder farmers to access this equipment, if I've addressed the question well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. Debbie. Sorry, we again have an issue with your sound. Are you able to? In the meantime, let me turn to Will Martin with a quick question. Apologies, Debbie. The question here is, countries have failed to agree on reforms at the WTO for a number of years. How can perhaps this agenda around repurposing be used to kind of create a little bit more momentum around the discussions on domestic support?
Oh, that's a really important question. I think it might well. I mean, the difficulty with domestic support has been a whole series of challenges. There are issues associated with public stockholding and so on. So a refocus of the issues on domestic support, looking for opportunities that are win-win, could be very helpful at the WTO. No guarantees, but the agenda needs to sort of move track in order to move ahead. And I think this may be a very helpful way of doing that.
Great, thanks very much, Will. Debbie, let's try you again.
Yeah, sorry, Charlotte, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Super. Apologies, everyone, for that. So you gave me two questions. The first was, if I understand it, about the transition that the UK or in England we've made, which is really about environmental land management. And when the UK left the Common Agricultural Policy, it has enabled an opportunity to sort of rethink agricultural support. And the approach that's been taken in England is about moving away from, as I said, area-based subsidies that aren't directly linked to delivering environmental benefits to having a much more environmentally focused regime. And that was really in recognition that there were areas where support was either inefficient or ineffective, and in some cases offering quite poor value for money and undermining productivity improvement. So, really the new approach is very much about supporting the UK in its aspirations to achieve net zero by 2050 and restoring nature and biodiversity, trying to improve water quality and soil health, and indeed improving animal health and welfare. And I think what we see is that fertilizer subsidies in many countries at present encourage inefficient use or indeed overuse, which in some cases is leading to declining efficiency of fertilizers. So the whole repurposing agenda is around directing the support to where there are better long-term benefits from public resource, both in terms of productivity, certainly, because that's critical, but also in terms of environmentally sustainable practices. And if I may, I think what we've learned in the UK is that this is a pivot that is both possible and positive, but it does matter how you do it. And it's important to recognise rural livelihoods as you do this and maintain productivity and production. So, if you like, in a sentence, the key thing is to maintain farmers at the centre of the approach and really be farmer-centric as you do it. On the second question, if I may, on how do you get reforms to stick after maybe the incentives and the financing has ended, I suppose in my view, it's like any really difficult, complex set of behaviour changes when you've got a lot of politics, you've got a lot of economics coming to play, and you've got individuals, and particularly with farmers globally, as we know, particularly smallholder farmers are very, very risk averse, and frankly, who could blame them given all the risks that they deal with. But for me, Sergiy made the point quite well, talking about you've got to do the technical preparation and be primed and ready for when the political opportunity comes. As I said, it's about having farmers at the centre of the approach. And then what you would aim to do is use the financing and the support to support farmers to understand the risks as well as possible, and to really understand what the risks really are versus maybe sometimes perceived risks, and to get them comfortable in that space, to help, if you like, meet the challenge of upfront costs to changing practices and support farmers through that. And then finally, to support farmers with behaviour change and support them to learn to do things differently, technical practices, etc., etc. And if we can crack that, and as I said, if we can ensure the economic incentives line up, if we can put farmers at the centre of the approach, and then if we can grab the political opportunity, ultimately this thing has to work. It has to stack up. It has to stack up in the eyes of individual farmers, and it has to work economically. If it doesn't, the practices won't stick. And that for me is the sort of the secret sauce at the center of the Venn diagram that we're all aiming for. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. We'll move now to our second panel, and we're looking here at some country and region-specific case studies. And we'll start with Alan Matthews, who, as we've just indicated, will discuss the situation in the EU. Alan is a professor emeritus at the Department of Economics in Trinity College, Dublin. And Alan, you're going to outline for us some of the very substantive reforms that have been undertaken in the EU, but also explain how these have run into some hurdles when it comes to their implementation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And indeed, my contribution will focus on the EU's agricultural policy, what we call the Common Agricultural Policy, or the CAP, and the Green Deal, and to try to draw some lessons for the repurposing of agricultural support agenda. I suspect everyone on this call will recognize that the CAP has undergone a series of reforms over the last number of decades, from its original policy of supporting farmers through very high prices and dumping the resulting surpluses on world markets, to replacing that with direct payments, initially coupled direct payments, and then more recently decoupled direct payments. What I want to focus on is the most recent set of reforms. And there are really two dimensions to this. One is the reform of the subsidy system, the CAP itself. But secondly, there is an increase in the regulatory oversight. And we might consider this as an attempt to internalize some of the external costs of agricultural production that have previously been mentioned. So to focus first on the subsidy reform. So this was a reform which was started in 2018, which was finalized in 2021, and which has come into force since the 1st of January of 2023. And it has three main elements, if I could just summarize. The first was a shift from a compliance focus to a performance focus. So this affected both the member state administrations, but also the farmers. So the idea was that instead of paying out subsidies on the basis that you were complying with a set of detailed regulations, and provided that you showed you complied, you got the money, the focus now is more on trying to look at the results, to look at performance, and to pay for performance rather than simply compliance. A second element was a move to what we call in Europe a new delivery model. And this really reflects the multi-level governance of agricultural policy within the European Union. So the idea here is to give member states greater flexibility to identify their own particular needs and to design the agricultural policies more in line with those needs. The policy now sets much more general objectives at EU level. It identifies a set of interventions that member states can use, but the actual choice of those interventions and how to put them together is now left up much more to the member states. But the third element is probably of most interest to this webinar. And that is the shift in the targeting of these direct payments. So if we look at the previous period of the CAP, around 66% of the total CAP budget went to area-based payments. So rather passive payments, as Debbie has rightly pointed out. Farmers get that funding, whether they are producing agricultural commodities at all. That share of 66% has been reduced to 50%. So not as much as what Debbie has talked about has occurred in England, but a step in the same direction. And that has allowed an increase in the more targeted environmental and climate measures from about 12% in the previous CAP to a doubling. In fact, a little bit more, sorry, did I say 16% in the previous CAP to about 32% in the current CAP. So more financial resources being directed towards these more targeted measures for farmers. But also a second point is that the obligations of farmers who receive this support have also been increased, what we call cross-compliance, or now the sort of conditionality. So that has been strengthened in the most recent reform. The other element that I spoke about is the regulatory agenda, and this refers to the European Green Deal. Now, the overall concept of the Green Deal is that it's a growth strategy, but for a climate neutral Europe by 2050. And the idea is that economic growth should be decoupled from resource use while protecting and preserving the EU's natural capital. And similarly here, we have two dimensions. We have a dimension focused on sort of industry and energy sector, and we have a dimension focused on agriculture, land, and nature. The overarching pillar here is the European Climate Law, which was accepted in 2021, and which does set that climate neutral or zero emissions target for 2050. And the element then affecting the industrial and energy decarbonization, what we call the Fit for 55 package, actually has delivered quite a lot of what it set out to do. So in response to your earlier questioner, who sort of argued that agriculture is being unfairly targeted, at least within the European Union, we do see strong efforts to decarbonize the energy and industrial sectors. And in fact, it's agriculture which is a little bit lagging behind. And indeed, that regulatory agenda has come against headwinds. And we've seen the farmer protests. And I might just sort of end by trying to identify a number of points which I think we can learn from this process of reform in the European Union that I've outlined. First of all, the role of timing is important. We've had the COVID pandemic, we've had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've had increased weather uncertainty, and this has raised the profile of food security issues within Europe relative to that environmental agenda. We could argue perhaps that there has been insufficient communication of the implications of the reform. We didn't really have an impact assessment of a lot of those changes before they were introduced. We've had perhaps insufficient attention to the losers from the reform. The nature of ecological reform, it requires detailed monitoring and verification, and science can really help, I think, here to try to reduce that burden of reporting on farmers, which certainly has been a factor behind the protests. There's an external dimension. Farmers protest that if they are being asked to produce to higher standards, why do we allow imports into Europe produced to lower standards? And finally, I think we do see a weakened position of the champions of reform, and we will have elections to the European Parliament in June, and a lot will depend on the outcome of those elections, whether that green agenda will continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. I think you've really teed up here. I think some of the this is front and center of EU politics right now. We now move to Shenggen Fan. It's my great pleasure to introduce him. He is the chair professor of the College of Economics and Management at China Agricultural University. He also serves on the CGIAR system board and on the IFPRI board. Shenggen, we're really pleased to have you with us, and you're going to present a number of scenarios looking at ongoing reforms, potential ongoing reforms in China and what they mean for the Chinese food system.
Thank you, Charlotte. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, great. So it's a really great pleasure to speak in this panel. I have heard quite a bit from previous speakers. I very much agree on what they have said. So here I just wanted to zoom into a country, China. So how China has changed its support policy and what are the challenges, what China can do better. So it is clear that Chinese agriculture support policy has changed over time quite significantly. Before 2000, China basically taxed agriculture, taxed farmers. But when China joined the WTO in 2001, that policy began to change gradually. particularly in 2006, China abolished the agricultural taxes, which has been practiced for thousands of years in the Chinese kingdom. And the support to agriculture began to increase, particularly price support, input purchase support, and output purchase support, output price support, and so on. So, but up to 2015, the government has recognized that the cost was too heavy, and also the subsidy has not reached to its targets. For example, protecting farmers' income, securing food supply domestically. So starting from 2015, China began to introduce several reform policy, particularly to dislink production with subsidies. They begin to use so-called support and protection subsidy to protect several key commodities and focus on conservations, like soil fertility, organic fertilizer introduction, and so on. And of course, the chemical fertilizer, pesticides are still supported, but the support has been reduced dramatically, particularly the subsidy of fertilizer manufacturing has been abolished. But now, up to now, in 2020 or 2022, 23, the support has been drastically changed, shifted, but nevertheless, there are still lots of challenges remain that needs to be solved. So just to give you some figures about agriculture support here in China, between 2018 and 2020, the Chinese total agriculture support accounted for 22% of agriculture GDP. But this is about the average of the world average, like 23%, higher than 12 emerging economies, which is about 15%, and lower than OECD country support, like 42%. And the support has been growing over time. For example, from 2010 to 2020, the growth has been more than 5% per year in real terms. And also structure of the support has been changed from a direct support to indirect support, budget support, and general services. So about 53, let's say the direct support has come down from 53% to 46%. And the general support has increased from 47% to 53%. Now, some of the challenges. So emerging food security and increased farmers' income. Well, I mean, obviously some of the benefits. So food security and increasing farmers' income. So over the last 10, 20 years, the Chinese food security has improved quite tremendously. So hunger has been eliminated. Farmers' income have also increased quite substantially. Now, the grain for grain and lots of environmental support has improved the afforestation, the land use conservation, and even increased carbon sink. The fertilizer and pesticide use have also been reduced. So, but some of the negative impact, I think that the market continued to be distorted, whether it's output price or input price, and the direct subsidies to inputs and machinery continue to exacerbate the agriculture pollution and increased the carbon emission. And inefficient attention to nutrition and health. So most of the subsidies do not have link to nutrition and health. So obviously the current subsidy needs to be reformed. And also this reform have to be linked to the national, let's say, national goals, objectives, for example, carbon neutrality goals set up by the government, and global goals such as WTO reforms and so on. Now, so I came back to China 4 years ago. So we have built a model to simulate how different policy reforms will help the food system transformation to achieve multiple goals that we all discussed. For example, nutrition, health, sustainability, climate mitigation, and inclusion to protect smallholders. So here is a model, the multidisciplinary, multi-sector, data-driven, and obviously it has lots of links with IFPRI. IFPRI is the impact model, IFPRI is the mirage model, and so on. So link traditional agriculture trade model with water, the hydronic model, climate change model, health nutrition model, and so on. And so we shop, or we let's say change the policy instruments, and through the model interactions, we will see final impact on nutrition, food security, health, inclusion, and resilience. So we have done several scenario analysis. The number one is to remove the total subsidy right now for grains, wheat, rice, soybeans, and so on. So by doing that, obviously the yield of rice, wheat, and maize will go down, and the country's self-sufficiency rate will go down. China will import more grains. And to some extent, the both rural and urban nutrition indicators will also compromise a little bit. So simply removing all the subsidies probably is going to do a bit harm in short run. However, if we shift all the subsidies from grains, from cereals to nutritious, healthy, and low carbon foods, then you will see that, well, to some extent, the yield of rice, wheat, and maize may go down a little bit. Price may go up, but the production of vegetable fruits will go up. And the prices of these nutritious, healthy foods will also go down. So as a result, the population's diet quality will improve. And carbon emission will also go down by 3% to 0.7%. So there are some trade-offs.
Shenggen,
Okay,
I'm sorry, we need to, if you could wrap up your scenario outcomes, that would be great.
Oh, that's just the two. Yeah, so, okay, one thing is we introduce certain fertilizer practices, for example, by combining chemical fertilizers with organic fertilizers to use some of the latest fertilizer technology, for example, snow releasing fertilizers and so on. And the impact is huge. You will see that the greenhouse gas emission will go down by more than 3%, and the yield of certain crops have not been compromised. Now, rice and fertilizer are another two major sources of emissions. So what we can do is to introduce certain practices to reduce the rice emissions, particularly methane emissions. For example, dry-wet alternation, direct seeding, and so on. The livestock, we improve livestock feed, its efficiency, livestock genetics, and so on. All this will also lead to reduction of carbon emissions by 5%, 8%, and so on. Now, investment. So, in addition to shifting the subsidies, we also simulated the impact of increased investment. That's investment in improving the land, high standard land, and also the double the investment in agriculture R&D, particularly increasing investment in fruits, vegetables, more healthy, nutritious foods, and more sustainable technologies. And you will see the impact is huge, particularly in terms of carbon emission. Carbon emission will be reduced by 14%. So if we combine all this together, the carbon emission from the agriculture food sector can be reduced by probably somewhere around 40 to 50% between now to 2060. And the nutrition, the diet quality, will also improve for general citizens. Okay, I will stop over here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Shenggen. And now we turn to Patrick Ofori again. We heard from him briefly before. Patrick serves as the Deputy Director and Head of Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate at the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Ghana. And you have a very interesting presentation on two phases of a major program in Ghana called Planting for Food and Jobs. Thanks for being with us, Patrick. We see you and
yeah,
hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. And good afternoon to you all. My name is Patrick Ofori, as has been mentioned. Actually, do this presentation on behalf of the Chief Director, Mr. Paul Siame, because he had urgent engagement at this last minute and I have to represent him. So I want to present to you Ghana's new agricultural development agenda, that is a planting for food and jobs phase 2. Between 2017 and 2022, the government implemented the PFD, that's the planting for food phase 1, with the aim of accelerating the modernization of agriculture in Ghana within the period. So the focus of this phase 1 program was mainly to use subsidies, direct subsidies, to promote inputs such as fertilizer and seeds to farmers, mainly smallholder farmers. Now, over the period, sorry, I can't see the slide. The slides are not changing. Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can see your slides.
Yes, so we can go to the next one. So over time, we realized within the period that there was relatively stable food security within the period. We saw, of course, some marginal productivity increases for various staples. As a result, we achieved some self-sufficiency in our major staples like maize, cassava, and yam. We also realized an increased sector growth within the period. That is for moving from, we had an average of 5.9 within the period 2017-2022. We also realized increased use of fertilizer from a low level of 8 kilogram per hectare to 25 kilogram per hectare, although below the African Union targets. We also realized increased adoption of use of improved seeds by farmers, basically smallholder farmers. And we also saw, because there was high demand for quality seeds, we saw that the local seed industry was booming within the period. Now, despite these achievements, we realized how the government expenditure was, should I say, put it, suffering in terms of there were high levels of expenditure on the inputs, especially fertilizer. At the point, government had to owe suppliers for a period, and at times resources will have to be transferred from other equally important sectors to support the sector. We also realized limited adoption of the value chain approach. We didn't focus on that. We were mainly focusing on use of seeds and fertilizer to improve production. So we were mainly focused on production to the detriment of value addition. We also focused mainly, the program focused mainly on smallholder farmers by excluding the commercial farmers' needs. And we also realized that we did not pay attention, we were not strategic with the national food stock that we'll have to reserve. Then last but not the least, we realized that because we did not monitor the program well, there were a lot of smuggling of the produce to our neighboring countries, and also people did their own, came up with their own inputs. So there were a lot of adulteration in the system. So some farmers could apply their fertilizer, but over a period they will not dissolve in the soil, having effect on the soil fertility. So these were some of the challenges. Now, to address these limitations, the PFJ1 has been reviewed, should I say restructured, to provide room for a model, an enhanced model that supports the entire value chain of selected commodities. Next, please. Yes, sir. Thank you. So, as a result, under the leadership of the minister, Honorable Brandon Champon, we came up with a second phase of the PFJ. And this PFJ, this phase will deliver a smart solution to catalyze growth and transform the food and agriculture sector. This program or this phase will see a shift. It's a shift from the direct input subsidy to a smart agricultural input system, which is linked to a structured market. And this second phase also eliminate barriers to access to credit, increase productivity, stabilize food prices, promote commercial agriculture, and ultimately improve food security and resilience. The program focused mainly on 11 commodities: maize, rice, soya, sorghum. And at the starchy staples, we have cassava, yam, and plantain, vegetables, tomato, pepper, and onion. After extensive deliberations, because of their importance in the Ghanaian diet, importance for food security, providing import substitution, and for export, and what have you. So these commodities were strategically selected. Next, please. So we focus on the key elements of the program. First of all, we want to look at the input credit model, where we are moving away from a subsidy to a zero interest credit system. In this case, payments for credits received will be in kind. We'll see very soon a model, show you the model that describe this in detail. Now, the other element, important element, is we, under this program or this phase, we see an assured, improved, high quality input with other services for the farmer. So these are the 5 elements. Next, please. Now, before then, which Sergiy, Sergiy said something. I want to confirm that. Please go back, please. Yes, under the digitized platform. This is the platform that is we call the Ghana Agricultural Agribusiness Platform. It's an extensive integrated platform, under which we have the network operation center, covering all the actors in the system, and also using the same platform to target farmers and also register farmers to be on the program. Next, please. Now, this is the model, and I don't have much time, but this is a model where an input supplier will provide inputs to an aggregator. An aggregator will also make sure that he provides the input that he has received from the aggregator to his farmers, and then at the same time providing mechanization services, extension services, irrigation services to the farmer. Then after harvest time, he goes back to collect the produce, the quality of produce equivalent to the value of inputs and services received over the period. And he transferred this to a warehouse, and the produce in the warehouse are traded on an exchange on the platform. It's not physical, where we have off-takers coming for produce from the warehouse. So off-takers taking produce from the warehouse pay their money to a financial institution, a selected financial institution, who in turn also pays the input dealer, because the input dealer is giving the input to the aggregator on credit. So the financial institution will provide again a letter of credit as a guarantee on behalf of government, so that the input supplier is not taking his money at the point of sale, but taking his money after the produce had got into the warehouse. So this is a cashless system which we are adopting in place of the direct subsidy. Next, please.
Patrick, could I ask you to wrap up? Thank you.
Yes. So well, these are the effective impact. We're looking at creating job. We'll enhance import substitution, and then income and wealth of farmers. And I must say also that aside this, in addition to this program, is where we are adopting the agricultural zones, where government is partnering with the private sector to develop contiguous land where you provide infrastructure with the private sector taking.
Patrick, I think. Patrick, I'm sorry. I think we are losing your sound. So apologies, Patrick. We're going to move on because we've lost you. Your sound is not coming through, so we're going to move to the next speaker.
Have you got me now?
Yes, just very briefly wrap up, please.
Wrap up. Okay, I'm wrapping to the last conclusion, please. I'm concluding on the next slide, please. Sorry. So we said this is a well-coordinated and structured, value chain-centered program that is central to for us to achieving value for money for actors in the value chain. And also, we are saying that this requires an effective partnership and resources to achieve our noble objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. We're now coming to our second Q&A session, so please do keep the great questions coming. I'm going to first turn to Bruno Brasil from Brazil. I love saying that. We have two questions here. One is from Edward. What policies support fair prices for smallholder farmers to promote sustainability, given that you've highlighted the focus on family farmers and smallholders in your G20 priorities? And another question comes to you from Alimi Abdullahi Adebayo from Nigeria. How can we encourage family farmers to participate in more sustainable food policy and food security approaches? Over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Two great questions. I'll start from the second one. Actually, when we design policies for agriculture and family farmers in Brazil, we put the farmers' needs at the core of the policy design. If we are talking about sustainability or environmental policy, we put the farmer needs, the family farmer needs at the core of policy design. We understand that's a locally adapted private activity. Therefore, we should provide them science-based solutions and the right incentives provided by the government. I'm talking here about loans, rural credit, not subsidies. We are assuring that activity is market-driven, and that could create a virtuous cycle of investment, either from the government or private investment, to leverage production towards a sustainable pathway. So two examples that we have in Brazil. We have a national program for strengthening family farming, and the government provides loans, rural credit for those producers that adopt sustainable practices. There is a list of sustainable practices that we have in our sectorial plan. It's called the Low Carbon Agriculture Plan in Brazil. It's been conducted for 14 years now, and we have good results. We have been quite successful in executing and implementing that policy. And regarding policies to support fair prices for smallholders in Brazil, as I have mentioned, Brazil usually does not use subsidies. It understands that using that you can distort trade and also not provide the right incentive for competitiveness of the producers. Therefore, the policies are based on loans and rural credit. And we also use public procurement purchases by the government and public institutions, especially from products produced by family farmers to schools and hospitals and other public institutions in Brazil. Those are some examples.
Great. Thank you very much, Bruno. We've had a number of questions coming up around fertilizers, and they have certainly been mentioned several times by the speakers' presentations. So the question comes from Dr. Srivastava from India, and it's how can we feed countries in highly populated countries like India without relying heavily on fertilizers? And maybe I can send this your way, Shenggen, given that China is a fairly intensive user of fertilizers, but has taken some real measures. And I think it's important here not just to talk about reducing fertilizer use, but making fertilizer use more efficient, more targeted. So maybe I can turn that to you. And of course, we also need to keep in mind here, as Patrick said, although Ghana has made some progress, they are still applying only 25 kilograms per hectare, which is not enough. So it's not just a question of reducing, but also in some cases increasing plant nutrition. But Shenggen, do you want to comment on that?
So, yeah, thank you, Charlotte. I think the fertilizer efficiency must be improved. Right now, the fertilizer application efficiency in many developing countries is only about 40%. So there's a great potential to narrow the gap. So what China did is to introduce higher, more effective fertilizers. So you actually reduce the fertilizers use without compromising the yield. And also in many countries, particularly China, probably parts of India, they overuse fertilizers, overuse. So reduce the fertilizer application, even considering the current technology, will not compromise the yield. Now, obviously, how do you use fertilizers? Timing, the amount, and the right, according to the right soil, it has a tremendous potential to do that. Some of the technologies, for example, use the radar screen to screen fertilizer, the crop leaves to see whether crops do need fertilizers is very critical. So yes, for Africa, probably more fertilizer is used, but I would suggest that more effective, more high quality, and in combination with organic fertilizer will do much better. Charlotte, going back to you.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I just lost connectivity there for just a second. I have a question that I'm going to direct over to Will, and it comes actually back to the WTO, Will. Jens Munch, a former EU ag official, is essentially saying domestic support negotiations in the WTO are not going anywhere. Because US, India, and China are perhaps not ready yet to make a change because they prefer the status quo. Do you care to comment on that? Again, maybe with this idea of can the repurposing agenda change this dynamic?
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree with that analysis of the problem. And that was my earlier suggestion that perhaps changing the agenda, changing the focus away from a set of issues that where the debate has become very sterile and very bogged down may be helpful. And that's going to require very imaginative work because there's some of the issues associated with repurposing will also involve difficulties. But particularly if there is a focus on what's the best way that we can achieve these goals, particularly taking into account the fact that what we really need is more research and development focused on green innovations that can lower emissions, but at the same time raise productivity. And I think Shenggen and Loraine and a number of other speakers have looked at particular options, the changing diets for ruminants, alternate wetting and drying. Both of these are win-win-win outcomes. They're good for the farmers, they're good for the countries, and they're good for the world. So if we could sort of change track in that direction, seeking solutions to all these problems, I think that would be a very positive outcome and it may help to refocus the negotiations.
Thank you, Will. One last question, and I will direct it to Yo if he's still with us. Otherwise, maybe Alan. Somebody has thanked us for raising some of these issues around political economy for repurposing, and asking what can we do next in terms of public outreach on this agenda. Yo, do you want to make some suggestions?
Well, I think that the whole today was actually incredibly insightful in that way. I think particularly the points that Debbie Palmer has made on, let's say, on the European agenda, but I think several of the points were more broader than that. I think also Sergiy Zorya from the World Bank drew really important lessons on how things have shifted and how things in the sense that the policies are changing, but also how this was possible in terms of lessons drawn, in terms of timing, combining things, providing information, bringing different groups on board. I mean, making coalitions of not just of the willing, I think, but broader coalitions where you bring in those who may perceive themselves as being hurt by the proposals, basically explaining them or putting packages together, bundling policies to make sure that they are part of those who see this as a benefit going forward. I think both Sergiy and Debbie made points on that. I think also Alan's point on a number of these issues were very valuable. So I think that's the lessons we have to draw from today's debate. I think it was very insightful in that way.
Great, thanks, Yo. And on that, let me thank very much all of our really distinguished speakers. Let me thank our audience. We had some great questions that I'm sorry we could not get to, but we will try to respond to those after the event. We have a number of interesting policy seminars coming up. The next one in this series will be a very interesting stock taking of the climate change negotiations at COP28, and looking forward to what we can expect around food systems at COP29 as well as COP30. That will take place on the 27th of March. Part of the CGIAR seminar series. And then separately, we have a event on March 5th on the conflict in Sudan, and on March 7th for our Global Food 50/50 launch, which looks at the role of women in some major food organizations. So please do check IFPRI's website to get more information on those events, and wishing all of you a great rest of your day or evening or night, wherever you may be. Thanks for joining us, and many thanks for the IFPRI's event management team as well. All the best. Bye-bye.